The phone rings at 2:47 a.m. Dean Martin doesn't move. He sits in the dark corner of the Sands Hotel penthouse, smoke curling from his cigarette, and lets it ring. Outside, Las Vegas burns with neon and money. Inside this room, the only light comes from the strip below, cutting shadows across his face. The phone keeps ringing. He knows who it is. He's known since the moment he walked off that stage 3 hours ago. The moment he said no in front of 2,000 people. The moment he made them look small. The ringing stops. For 5 seconds, there's silence. Then it starts again. To understand what Dean Martin did that night, you have to understand what Las Vegas was in 1967. Not the corporate theme park it would become. Not the family-friendly illusion of danger. The real thing. A city built on borrowed money and enforced friendships. A place where the counting rooms had no cameras, and the men who owned the hotels didn't need business cards. Dean had been playing the Sands for years. Not just performing, belonging. He was part of the architecture, part of the promise the casino made to every gambler and gawker who walked through those doors. You're in the room where it happens. The Rat Pack wasn't a marketing gimmick yet. It was 5 men who could fill the showroom just by showing up drunk. Frank, Dean, Sammy, Joey, Peter. They didn't rehearse, they didn't need to. But something had shifted. The Sands had new owners. Not the smiling men in Italian shoes who'd opened the place. Not the ones who understood that Dean Martin was worth more than his contract because he felt like he owned the room when he sang. These new owners came from corporations. From boardrooms in Los Angeles and banks in New York. They looked at the Sands and saw numbers. They looked at Dean Martin and saw overhead. There had been small humiliations, a reduced comp policy for his guests, questions about his bar tab, a suggestion, friendly of course, that maybe he didn't need the entire penthouse every weekend. Dean had smiled through all of it. He was good at smiling. He'd built a career on looking like nothing ever bothered him. But then came the morning of September 11th, 1967. Dean was in the casino, moving slow through the tables like he always did, shaking hands and kissing women on the cheek. Carl Cohen, the Sands vice president, approached him near the Baccarat pit. Carl was old Vegas, thick around the middle, permanent sunburn and eyes that never blinked first. He'd been with the Sands since the beginning. Dean liked him well enough, respected him anyway. Carl said they needed to talk about Dean's markers. Markers, casino credit, the chips you signed for when you were gambling and promised to pay back later. Dean had markers at every casino on the Strip. Everyone did. It was how the system worked. You played, you lost, you signed, and eventually, when you felt like it, you settled up. The casinos never pushed the performers, not the big ones, not the names that filled rooms. But Carl was pushing. "How much?" Dean asked. "About 200,000. Dean didn't blink. 200,000 in 1967 money. Serious, but not unmanageable. Not for someone pulling in 50,000 a week when he performed. "I'll take care of it," Dean said. Carl nodded, started to walk away, then stopped. The new management wants it cleared by the end of the week. That's when Dean understood. This wasn't about money. This was about making him ask permission, about reminding him that the Sands owned the stage he stood on, that he was an employee, not a partner. Dean said, "I'll get to it when I get to it." Carl's face didn't change, but something in his posture tightened. "Dean, I said I'll handle it." And Dean walked away. He should have known better. Maybe he did know better. Maybe that was the point. That night, Dean performed like nothing had happened. He sang, "Everybody Loves Somebody," and forgot half the words, and made it seem intentional. He drank real scotch, not the iced tea some performers used. He brought a woman up from the audience and danced with her while Frank heckled from the bar. The crowd loved it. They always loved it. But backstage, after the show, Carl Cohen was waiting. This time, he wasn't alone. There were 2 men Dean didn't recognize. Younger, suits that fit too well. The kind of men who stood with their hands folded in front of them like they were guarding something. Carl's face was red. Not from sun this time. "We need to settle this now," Carl said. Dean lit a cigarette. I'm working on it. You've been working on it for 3 months. I've been busy. One of the younger men stepped forward. Mr. Martin, the hotel has been very generous with... Dean cut him off with a look. Not aggressive, just empty. The look that said, I don't know you, and I don't care what you think you are. Carl, Dean said, not looking away from the younger man. Who's your friend? New management, Carl said quietly. Dean turned back to Carl. Then new management can wait until I'm ready. He walked out. For 2 days, nothing happened. Dean gambled. He performed. He sat by the pool with a drink and signed autographs. On the surface, everything looked the same, but people who knew Vegas, who understood its rhythms, felt the shift. Dealers started avoiding Dean's table. Pit bosses watched him differently. The bartenders still poured his drinks, but they didn't joke anymore. Frank called, What the hell are you doing? Playing blackjack. Dean, I'm fine, Frank. Carl Cohen is not somebody you embarrass. I didn't embarrass him. I told him I'd pay when I'm ready. There was a long pause on the line, Frank's breathing. Then, you know what they're saying, right? That you think you're bigger than the hotel. I don't think anything. I just don't like being told when to write a check. Write the fucking check, Dean. Dean hung up. The breaking point came on September 13th, just after midnight. Dean was at the craps table, surrounded by tourists and hangers-on. He was up 30,000. The dice were hot, and the crowd was pressed in close, feeding on the energy of watching someone famous win. Dean was in his element, half drunk, fully charming, making jokes with the stick man. Carl Cohen walked up, stood directly across the table from Dean. Didn't say anything. Just stood there. Dean ignored him, rolled again. Boxcars. The table groaned. Dean, Carl said. Dean picked up his chips, started to walk away. Carl grabbed his arm. Not hard, not violent, just enough to stop him. The table went silent. The tourists, the dealers, the cocktail waitresses, everyone felt it. You didn't touch Dean Martin in the middle of the casino. You didn't grab him like he was some drunk college kid. Dean looked down at Carl's hand on his arm, then at Carl. Let go, Dean said. Quiet. Calm. Carl didn't let go. You're embarrassing yourself, Carl said, and you're embarrassing the hotel. Dean pulled his arm free. Not aggressive, just done. Carl, Dean said, still calm, go fuck yourself. And he walked out of the casino. The next part happened fast. Dean went to the hotel's coffee shop. Not the fancy restaurant where celebrities ate. The plain, fluorescent-lit coffee shop where dealers grabbed food between shifts. He ordered eggs and sat in a booth by himself. He was still holding 20,000 in chips. Carl found him 10 minutes later. This time Carl wasn't calm. He walked up to Dean's booth, breathing hard, face the color of raw meat. He leaned down, both hands on the table. You don't talk to me like that, Carl said. Dean looked up from his eggs. I just did. You think you're special? You think you're untouchable? I think I've made this hotel a lot of money. You've cost this hotel money. Your markers, your bar tabs, your fucking friends drinking free every night. Dean put his fork down. Then tear up my contract. Carl blinked. What? You heard me. If I'm costing you money, tear it up. I'll play somewhere else. The coffee shop had gone quiet. Waitresses pretended to refill salt shakers. A busboy stood frozen with a tray of dirty plates. Carl straightened up. You're under contract for 3 more months. So sue me. Dean, or don't. I don't care. But I'm not writing that check tonight. And I'm not writing it because you told me to. Carl's jaw worked. He looked around the coffee shop, aware now that people were watching. That this moment, whatever it was, would be repeated, whispered about, that he was losing something he couldn't get back. You're making a mistake, Carl said. Dean picked up his fork. Probably. Carl turned and walked out. Dean should have left it there. He knew it even as he sat in that booth, finishing eggs that had gone cold. He'd made his point. He'd stood his ground. In a saner version of this story, he would have paid the markers the next day, shaken hands with Carl, and everyone would have pretended it never happened. That's how Vegas worked. You pushed, you got pushed back, and then you all had a drink and moved on. But Dean didn't move on. He went back to the casino, sat down at the blackjack table, his table, the one in the center of the floor where everyone could see him, and he played. For 3 hours he played. He didn't win, didn't lose much either. Just sat there drinking scotch, signing more markers, making small talk with the dealer. The crowd gathered again, tourists taking photos, pit bosses watching from a distance, and Carl Cohen standing at the edge of the pit, staring at Dean with something that wasn't anger anymore. It was colder than that. At 3:15 a.m., Carl walked over. He didn't say anything this time. He reached past Dean and gathered up his chips. All of them. Just swept them off the table into his hands. Dean watched him do it. "Those are mine," Dean said. "No," Carl said. "They're the hotel's, and you're done." The dealer looked down. The tourists went quiet. Dean stood up, slowly. He was 6 feet tall but lean. Carl was shorter, thicker, the kind of man who'd grown up settling things with his hands. "Put them back," Dean said. "Go to bed, Dean." "Put them back, Carl." "You're drunk." "I'm not drunk. I'm telling you to put my chips back on the table." Carl stepped closer. "And I'm telling you to go upstairs before you make this worse." Dean didn't move. "Worse for who?" Carl's face was 6 inches from Dean's now. "For you." And that's when Dean made the choice. He could have walked away, should have walked away. But something in Carl's face, something in the way the whole casino was watching, waiting to see if Dean Martin would blink, made him stay. "You want me gone?" Dean said, loud enough now that the tables around them could hear. "You want me to stop costing you money? Then tear up my contract and let me walk." "You're under contract." "Then honor it. Let me play." Carl's hands were shaking. The chips rattled in his palms. "Last chance, Dean." "For what? For you to tell me I can't gamble in a casino? In a casino I helped build?" Carl threw the chips. Not at Dean, just threw them. They scattered across the floor, clattering and spinning, red and black and green, rolling under tables and between feet. Tourists scrambled for them. A woman laughed nervously. Dean looked at the chips, then at Carl. "You're going to regret that," Dean said, and Carl Cohen punched him. It wasn't a sucker punch. Dean saw it coming, saw Carl's shoulder dip, saw his weight shift. But Dean was 50 years old and half drunk, and Carl had been breaking up fights in casinos for 20 years. The punch caught Dean on the right side of his face, just below the eye. His head snapped back. He stumbled into the blackjack table, chips and cards scattering. Someone screamed. Tourists backed away. Dean touched his face. His fingers came away bloody. Carl was breathing hard, fists still clenched, looking at Dean like he couldn't believe he'd done it, and couldn't believe he was about to do it again. Dean straightened up and smiled, blood on his teeth. "That the best you got?" Carl hit him again. Casino security pulled them apart before it went further. 4 men in blazers, dragging Carl backward while 2 others held Dean by the arms. Dean didn't fight them, didn't struggle, just stood there, blood running down his chin, staring at Carl. The casino had gone completely silent. 2,000 people, gamblers, dealers, waitresses, tourists with cameras, staring at Dean Martin bleeding in the middle of the sands. Carl was shouting something. The security guards were pulling him toward the back offices. But Dean wasn't listening to Carl. He was looking at the crowd, at their faces, at the way they'd gone from excited to horrified to something else. Something that looked like disappointment, like they'd just watched a magic trick explained. Dean pulled free from the security guards. They let him. Where was he going to go? He walked to the bar, grabbed a napkin, pressed it to his face. The bartender, Tommy, who'd been pouring Dean's drinks for 5 years, looked at him with something like pity. "You okay, Mr. Martin?" Dean didn't answer. He dropped a $100 chip on the bar and walked out of the sands. The story made the papers by morning, not the front page. Vegas had a way of keeping its dirty laundry on page 6, buried between hotel ads and showroom listings. But it was there. Dean Martin brawls with Sands executive. The article was brief, clinical. It mentioned an altercation over outstanding markers and a brief physical confrontation. It quoted an unnamed hotel spokesman saying the matter was being resolved internally. It noted that Dean Martin had canceled his remaining performances. What the article didn't mention, the way the dealers had gone silent when Dean walked out, the way Frank had called 6 times in 3 hours and Dean hadn't answered, the way Carl Cohen sat in his office with ice on his knuckles and wondered if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his career. Dean didn't leave Vegas. He should have. Everyone expected him to. Fly back to LA, let his lawyers handle it, wait for the whole thing to blow over. But Dean checked into the Riviera. The Riviera was down the strip, smaller than the Sands, with cheaper carpets and older slot machines. It wasn't where Dean Martin played. But the owner was a man named Ed Torres, who'd started as a dealer and worked his way up. Ed had always liked Dean, and Ed didn't ask questions when Dean walked into his lobby at 4 a.m. with a busted face and a suitcase. "Need a room?" Ed asked. "Need a stage," Dean said. Ed blinked. "You want to perform here?" "If you'll have me." "Dean, you're under contract with the Sands." "Not anymore." Ed leaned back in his chair. He was 55, bald, with the permanent squint of a man who'd spent 40 years under casino lights. He'd heard what happened. Everyone had heard by now. "You know they're going to sue you," Ed said. "Let them. You know Carl Cohen has friends." "So do I." Ed studied Dean's face. The swelling under his eye, the dried blood on his collar. "Why?" Ed asked. Dean didn't answer for a long time. Then, "Because if I don't, they win." Ed nodded slowly. "You open Friday," he said. The fight went legal fast. The Sands filed for breach of contract. They wanted damages. They wanted him barred from performing in Vegas until his contract expired. Their lawyers were expensive and angry and very good at their jobs. Dean's lawyer was a man named Mickey Rudin, who also represented Frank. Mickey was smart enough to know this case wasn't about money. "They're making an example of you," Mickey said. They were sitting in the Riviera's coffee shop. Dean was on his 3rd cup of black coffee. His face was still swollen. "Let them." "Dean, they can make this very expensive." "I don't care." "You should care. If they win, you can't work in this town." Dean looked at him. "You think I'm going to lose?" "I think you punched above your weight." "Carl punched me." "After you provoked him." "I asked for my chips." Mickey sighed. "A judge isn't going to see it that way." "Then I'll lose." "And then what?" Dean didn't answer. He stared out the window at the strip. The Sands was visible in the distance, its sign burning bright even in daylight. "Then I'll go somewhere else," Dean said finally.
Hearing was set for October 3rd. In the 3 weeks between the fight and the court date, Vegas chose sides. Some performers stayed loyal to Dean. Sammy called every day. Joey Bishop showed up at the Riviera unannounced and sat with Dean in his dressing room without saying much. They didn't need to say much, but others went quiet. Frank didn't call back. Peter Lawford, who'd been in the Rat Pack from the start, released a statement through his publicist saying he had no comment on private business matters. The casino owners, most of them, anyway, sided with the Sands. Not publicly. They didn't need to, but the message was clear: you don't bite the hand that feeds you. You don't embarrass a casino in front of its guests. And you definitely don't make them drag you into court. Ed Torres got calls. Friendly calls. Calls from men who suggested politely that maybe Dean Martin wasn't worth the trouble, that maybe the Riviera should reconsider its new star attraction. Ed told them all the same thing. Dean's playing here. If you don't like it, don't come. Dean's opening night at the Riviera was October 1st, 2 days before the hearing. The showroom held 800 people. By 7 p.m., there were 1,000 packed in, standing in the aisles, sitting on the floor near the stage. News cameras were set up in the back, reporters with notepads, tourists who'd heard the story and wanted to say they were there. Dean walked out at 8:15. His face was still bruised, yellow and purple under his right eye. He wore a tuxedo and carried a rocks glass. The crowd went silent. Dean looked out at them. So, he said, I had a bad week. The crowd erupted. Laughter, applause, a few people shouted. Dean waited for it to die down. They say I can't take a punch, he continued. I say Carl Cohen can't take a joke. More laughter, but it was different this time. Not nervous, relieved. Dean started to sing. He opened with That's Amore, which was almost too on the nose, but it worked. The crowd sang along. Then he did Ain't That a Kick in the Head, which got a huge laugh. He forgot words. He drank real scotch. He made fun of his own face. And for 90 minutes it felt like nothing had changed. But something had changed. Dean wasn't performing for the casino anymore. He was performing against them. Every joke, every song, every sip of scotch was a reminder. They'd tried to make him small and he'd refused. When he finished, the standing ovation lasted 4 minutes. Dean stood on stage, bruised and drunk and smiling, and for the first time in weeks, he looked like he believed he'd made the right choice. The hearing lasted 3 hours. The Sands lawyers were professional and prepared. They entered Dean's contract into evidence. They brought in Carl Cohen, who testified calmly, quietly, that Dean had been belligerent, drunk, and physically threatening. They brought in witnesses, a dealer, a pit boss, a cocktail waitress who'd seen the fight. They painted a picture of a man who thought he was above the rules. Mickey Rudin didn't argue with the facts. He argued with the framing. This isn't about a contract, Mickey said. It's about power. The Sands wants to punish Mr. Martin for having the audacity to say no, for refusing to be humiliated in his own workplace, for standing up when they told him to sit down. The judge, a man named Harrison, who'd been on the bench for 20 years and had seen every kind of Vegas lawsuit imaginable, listened without expression. When it was Dean's turn to testify, Mickey asked him one question. Why didn't you just pay the markers? Dean looked at the judge, then at the Sands lawyers. Because it wasn't about the money, Dean said. Then what was it about? Dean was quiet for a moment. Respect, he said finally. The judge made his ruling 2 weeks later. He found in favor of the Sands. Breach of contract. Damages $50,000, and Dean Martin was barred from performing at any major Vegas casino for 6 months. The Sands lawyers called it a victory. Dean called it a bargain. He left Vegas the next day. Didn't make a big production of it, just packed his suitcase, said goodbye to Ed Torres and drove back to Los Angeles in his Cadillac. The Riviera had offered him a longer deal, but Dean turned it down. I made my point, he told Ed. Did you? Ed asked. Dean smiled. I'm still standing, aren't I? The long-term fallout was complicated. Dean never went back to the Sands. His contract was voided, and by the time the 6-month ban expired, the Sands' ownership had changed again. The new owners didn't want the publicity. They quietly settled. Carl Cohen stayed with the Sands for another 5 years, then retired. He gave one interview about the fight in 1973 and said, Dean was a hell of a performer, but he didn't understand business. Frank and Dean reconciled eventually. It took a year. Frank called one night, didn't apologize, and asked if Dean wanted to come over for dinner. They never talked about the Sands again. Dean kept performing. He played the Riviera a few more times, then the MGM Grand, then back to the circuit, television, films, concerts. By 1970, nobody remembered the fight except as a funny story Dean told on talk shows. But people in Vegas remembered. The dealers remembered watching Dean Martin get punched and not back down. The pit bosses remembered the way he walked out of the Sands with blood on his face and went straight to another stage. And the performers, especially the young ones, the ones trying to make it, remembered that you could say no, that you could stand up, that the worst thing that could happen was they could hit you and you could still walk out with your dignity. In 2016, a reporter asked Dean's daughter Dina about the fight. Do you think he regretted it? The reporter asked. Dina thought for a moment. No, she said. I think he regretted that it had to happen, but I don't think he regretted standing up. Dean Martin died in 1995. He was 78 years old. He'd been retired for years by then, living quietly in Los Angeles, away from cameras and stages and casinos. When the obituaries came out, they talked about his music, his movies, his charm. They mentioned the Rat Pack and Frank Sinatra and the golden age of Las Vegas. Only one obituary mentioned the fight with Carl Cohen. It was a single line, buried in the middle. In 1967, Martin had a well-publicized altercation with a casino executive. No details, no context, just a footnote. But the people who'd been there, the dealers, the waitresses, the performers who'd watched it happen, they told the story differently. They told it like a moment when the system blinked. When a man in a tuxedo, bleeding and bruised, walked out of the most powerful casino in Vegas and kept singing. They told it like it mattered. The phone rings at 2:47 a.m. Dean Martin sits in the dark corner of a penthouse that isn't his anymore, smoke curling from his cigarette. Outside, Las Vegas burns with neon and money. Inside, the only light comes from the strip below. The phone rings. He doesn't answer, because he already knows what they're going to say, and he's already made his choice.